Hey everyone, Samantha here. This is Preservation During Conflict, Then and Now. This is what I've chosen to call my consideration of two major case studies in heritage preservation during conflict to examine how it's evolved, how new technologies play a role, and just how the approach to preservation has really changed over time. I will start with just a brief introduction about why we care about preservation during conflict in the first place. That'll lead into our then example, which is World War II and the Monuments Men. Following that will be the now example, where I'll take a look at the Russian invasion of Ukraine and the heritage preservation approaches there and that are currently ongoing. And I'll conclude with just some further questions for discussion for you all and some additional resources in case anyone wants to dive in deeper. So, preservation in conflict. Why do we care about preservation during conflict? This can be argued from many different perspectives, but personally, I see preservation of heritage to be incredibly important during cultural conflict, particularly through the lens of cultural rights. The conditions required for enacting and experiencing cultural rights it really plays a vital role in upholding human rights at large. The preservation of cultural rights during times of conflict is important just simply to maintain modalities of identity for cultures involved in the crisis, to protect freedom and individualism within societies, which, as we've learned throughout our time in the program and just in general, that the freedom to be an individual and to create your own identity within a culture, within your own heritage, is really the basis for a healthy society. So, looking back to the Monuments Men, I wanted to begin with this quote from the report of the American Commission for the Protection and Salvage of Artistic and Historic Monuments in War Areas, which is quite a mouthful. It's also known as the Roberts Commission, thanks to FDR, saying that the task was nothing less than to preserve as much as they could of man's creative past is kind of grandiose, but preserving the creative history of man really is not a simple task, and it is true that the impact that the Monuments Men and these group of professionals had really far outweighs the number of people that were involved. Their impact really outstretched into history, and we feel the impact of their work today. So these quote-unquote few men were actually a group of 345 men and women, art historians, museum and art professionals, archivists, all of which who volunteered as military officers to protect historical monuments, to protect art and archives and library materials within the European war theaters. Over the course of the war, monuments officers found well over 1,000 storage sites of looted art hidden by the Nazis over the years. So evacuating valuable cultural materials was really the primary goal of the Monuments Men. Returning and exhibiting materials became the next goal as the war came to a close. Obviously, this is a remarkably reductive overview of the entire situation that is a lot more complex when spanned a lot more time than I have to really cover it here. So I do highly recommend investigating further within the many digital museum archives related to the Monuments Men and this history. The National Gallery of Art is a really robust collection. The Frick Collection and the Smithsonian also have really robust archives on the Monuments Men and World War II and heritage materials, images, correspondence, all sorts of really cool things that preserve this history. The preservation approach of the Monuments Men and during World War II was to first identify what needed to be preserved, limit the damage done to the materials, and really it was a recovery operation. The recovery aspect of the Monuments Men operation is what I want to highlight here. The creation of organizations for heritage preservation and for finding materials and transporting all the looted art all of this was a reaction and a response to the already damaged and stolen materials as a result of the conflict. So it was really reactionary in terms of how the preservation was approached. I won't play this video right now just for the sake of time, but it's not very long. I think it's about 5 minutes, and it's definitely worth the watch to get an idea of the varying types of archival materials that we have to help provide such a clear picture of the monuments men and their preservation operations, their documentation methods, how everything was developed and executed is really clearly outlined for us within the archives, and thanks to the thoughtful and intentional catalogers and record keepers during the time. Stephen Bury, the chief librarian at, I believe, the Frick collection, the Frick Art Reference Library, he has a really concise way of explaining these archival materials and quite a pleasant accent to listen to, so I recommend taking a look. I also wanted to include in this section some examples of the types of archival images we have from this time. I definitely got quite lost in the archives while doing research for the presentation. It's fascinating and somewhat meta to see all of these masterpieces, both within archives in their own right as works, and also depicted within other images throughout their journey within World War II and the conflict and the movement of these pieces. All of these images are from the Thomas Carr Howe papers at the Archives of American Art, also a really great resource to check out. So now that we've got an overview of a historical case study in preservation during crisis, I want to shift our attention to the present and take a look at how the Russian invasion of Ukraine has affected the country's cultural institutions, and also just take a look at how the preservation approach has changed. This is a really impactful quote that I found throughout my reading. Milena Chorna is with the Ukrainian Museum Crisis Center, and she says that collecting, preserving, and revealing to the world the stories and artifacts of the Russo-Ukrainian War is the priority mission for the museum. The museum took an active position at the cultural and informational fronts to shed light on the crimes of the aggressor and appeal to the world to resist the evil with us. The conflict in Ukraine is deeper than simply defeating a country or winning a war. It's really about the elimination of a culture. Since the invasion was undertaken as a route to erase Ukrainian identity, the focus of many Ukrainians from the beginning of the invasion has been not only on the livelihood of the people, but also the state of the history and monuments that help form Ukrainian identity. The president of the World Monuments Fund noted that their operations have very much been informed by previous conflicts. The mobilization of heritage professionals in World War II, as well as other recent active conflicts in Syria and Turkey, have helped everyone involved create plans. In this conflict, major approaches to heritage preservation are categorized into two major areas. First is the protection of the physical sites, the buildings, the libraries, the monuments that hold Ukrainian history and identity. And the other part is the protection of the information and the cultural information housed within these monuments and buildings. So to address these two major facets of the task, professionals have turned to the winterization and shelter building processes to protect exposed monuments, as well as explore digitization options to really leverage technology in the preservation of art and information. Producing digital copies of written materials, developing 3D scans of sites. Professionals are really aiming to safeguard as much as possible in a preventative way, from a preventative standpoint, before the conflict has a chance to reach them and to damage them. So there are various channels through which Ukrainian institutions have been able to access the expensive and complex technologies required for digitization. In Odessa, UNESCO supported the development of a digital platform, the Fine Arts Museum. UNESCO is also facilitated transport of scanners and other materials. So by the end of 2022, about 10% of all documents have been digitized. This work is actively ongoing because the conflict is actively ongoing. So new technologies are being embraced within this preservation approach. Emerging 3D scan technologies are allowing heritage professionals to create virtual replicas of monuments and buildings that have been damaged, virtual galleries for museums that can't be physically visited anymore. By scanning important heritage sites that are also intact, they're looking at possibilities of VR and AR applications to explore Ukrainian heritage in a way that is no longer physically possible due to the invasion. Currently, a little over a year after the Russian invasion, the Culture Crimes website cites 553 damaged and destroyed objects of the cultural heritage and cultural institutions of Ukraine. So this is a really interesting site. It's being consistently updated as these professionals move through the country and are documenting the destruction of their culture. I wanted to note a few cool digital repositories that have come about because of these technological initiatives in preservation in Ukraine. The screenshot on the left is just from the homepage of the Culture Crimes site, both in English and Ukrainian. It's constantly updated, so anyone can check back in and watch videos, see documentation, see images of the state of these institutions. So definitely check these out. Sucho is really cool, Saving Ukrainian Cultural Heritage Online. It's an initiative of international volunteers who are collaborating online to digitize the heritage, their web archiving websites and data of the Ukrainian cultural institutions, which is really cool. And these are all striking images I've come across in my research. You can take a look at the captions here to investigate further. I do want to point out that the bottom right image is taken from the Cultural Heritage Monitoring Lab that cites to date nearly 1,600 cases of potential damage to cultural heritage sites. This is also an actively updated resource. So after considering both then and now in heritage preservation during conflict, I want to conclude here with my discussion questions. So I know I've gone a little bit over time. I have so much I can say about all this, but I really am interested to hear everyone's thoughts on digitization here. This is, as we know, a very hot topic just in general in the world of cultural institutions. But I found that examining digitization through the lens of heritage and conflict has been really enlightening. I wonder what all of you would say to questions of digitization as preservation, particularly during conflict. How can these processes benefit, hinder, or perhaps both benefit and hinder preservation efforts? And further, as these case studies have shown, conflict and preservation approaches both evolve over time. I'd love to hear your considerations on emerging modes of conflict and crises like digital terrorism, cyber attacks, things like that, and how preservation approaches might currently be evolving or how they may need to evolve to handle these types of crises. So wrapping up here with my sources and a list of some additional resources to explore. These are all hyperlinked in the presentation if you want to take a look. Thank you all so much for listening if you've made it this far, and I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts.